Hello, 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 and welcome to the Sprinklr Coffee Club. Welcome back. I'm Marshall Kirkpatrick, your host, and I am looking forward to drinking some coffee here on this morning time with a fabulous guest. In fact, our first ever repeat Coffee Club guest here at the Sprinklr Coffee Club, the fantastic applied futurist, Mr. Tom Cheesewright. Tom, thanks so much for joining us today.
Your good health, Marshall. Your good health.
Yes, cheers. All the way from the UK, having an international conversation here this morning in this time of increasing connectivity for better and for worse. But this is the upside here, getting to talk to people like you, Tom. What a pleasure.
Thank you. Likewise.
So, folks, Tom Cheesewright goes by the Twitter handle and the moniker around the web, Book of the Future. He is an awesome blogger. He's a really good podcaster. Oh, your podcast, I can't sing his praises enough. And he has just published a wonderful book called Future Proof Your Business, published by Penguin. So congratulations on that, Tom.
Thank you. Thank you. It's all come rather sooner than expected, given the weird situation we're in. So the book was meant to be published on the 30th of July. And just literally just a couple of weeks ago, my editor at Penguin rang me up and said, what do you think about bringing the launch of the book forward? It seems very relevant to the current crisis. And this was a Thursday afternoon. And I said, sure, great, let's do it. When are you thinking? She said, Tuesday. So it's been a very accelerated launch, but so far, so good.
Wow, that's fantastic. Well, you explored many of the themes that we discussed last time you were here on Coffee Club, work that you have began to explore through a series of blog posts, but there was a lot in the book that was new to me as well, and really tangible stuff, really solid advice. You don't call yourself an applied futurist for nothing, Tom. I'm looking forward to applying some of your futurism myself. In our organization. Can you tell us a little bit about the book?
Sure. Well, I mean, I guess the first book, High Frequency Change, was really the why, and it was a why in two ways. It was a why do I feel like the world's shifting faster? Why do I feel uncomfortable? Why do I feel like I ought to be making changes? But also, really, it was a why for me. It was, why on earth are these massive companies ringing me up and saying, help? You know, why are they ringing this guy who calls himself a futurist and bring him in? There's these global 500 companies who we all look to and think they know the answers. And suddenly you find yourself in a meeting room with them and they're asking the same questions everybody else did. So, the first book was really an opportunity for me to try and answer that question. But that obviously leaves you with the how. Like, once you've done the why, you've got to do the how. It's no good saying what the problem is unless you've got a solution. Certainly not if you call yourself an applied futurist. So this book's really the how. There's a bit of the sort of philosophy in there, but really it's a very practical book. It says, what are the fundamental steps that I need to take as an organization to deal with this sense of destabilization and build an organization that I can be confident is not just going to be successful next month or next year, but is going to leave a legacy that I leave behind as leader, in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. What is the platform for sustainable success?
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. And it goes on within a context of, as you have said, high frequency change, which is a nuanced concept. Can you tell us a little bit about that context we find ourselves in?
Sure. So I guess when I started out as a futurist 8 years ago, there was a really simple sort of mantra for me. And it came from reading, Ray Kurzweil and, having worked in the technology industry a lot, where there's this underlying belief that change happens faster now, that we're on this sort of exponential curve towards the singularity, where change just keeps happening faster and faster and faster, driven by technology. And it's a really attractive narrative. It's a really attractive narrative if you're trying to sell big companies on your services as a consultant or a speaker. And I totally believed it, passionately believed it, and sold it to other people until a friend of mine, as a historian, pointed out that it's just not true. In fact, he used slightly ruder words than that in very typically British fashion. And so it sent me back to the drawing board. And what I realized was that you can't argue that change is happening faster now. In fact, I'd be a total hypocrite to argue that it was. I'm sat here in a 140-year-old house, all the houses in my area are, over 100 years old. They haven't changed particularly fast. I still sleep in a bed. I still, like most people, I assume, use a toilet that was designed 400 years ago. Lots of things actually change really, really slowly. And yet, in lots of industries that I was quite close to, whether that was media or music or retail or now automotive and banking, you see these incredibly fast moving waves of change driving incredible disruption. And so what I tried to do was characterize these high frequency waves of change that appear on the near horizon, turn an industry upside down, and then move on again. And try and give people some guidance in terms of how you see those waves and understand them and differentiate them from the big multi-decade cross-sectoral trends that touch everybody's life.
Fantastic. And how does that relate to one of the central theses of your book, that networks always beat monoliths?
So my argument is that even though everything isn't changing faster, every industry, every sector at some point is going to face this disruption. There is going to be a wave of high frequency change. And by their very nature, in our hyper-connected, globally connected world, where the price of innovation has been dropped and the accessibility of technology and the tools of innovation are much broader now, much cheaper, that you're going to face disruption at some point. And so if you are spending all of your time optimizing for where your sector is today, if you are focused on efficiency, on driving down cost, growing profit, growing revenue on your existing business model, you are inherently driving out flexibility. You are driving out the ability to adapt when that change comes. And actually, as a leader, it's your responsibility to turn that on its head and say, do you know what? Efficiency is not our ultimate goal. We can't be wasteful. We can't be profligate. But my goal as a leader is to change this business to be adaptable. I've got to make sure that when that change comes, we're the first to see it. We decide what we're going to do about it quickly, and we're structured to make that change quickly and respond to whatever's coming. And part of that structural approach that's really important is saying, we don't want to be this tightly integrated monolith that's perfectly adapted for where we are today, like so many businesses we've seen fail have been. What we want to be is more a sort of loosely coupled network of units, like a box of Lego bricks, that when I want to dynamically reassemble my business to face a new challenge, I'm not trying to cut something apart. It's already broken apart into these functional bricks that I can see, that are transparent, and I can reassemble to meet that new challenge. And then the analogy I give quite often, I say I do quite a work in the automotive industry, and I did this slide for Audi about a year or two back, where I did the classic Audi Quattro, a toy car that I had as a child, which won endless rally races. I don't think rallying is particularly big in the US, but rallying is big in Europe, where you get these sort of cars souped up with four-wheel drive, and they go off-road around the mountains and hills. And the Audi Quattro just dominated over and over and over again. And I showed these guys from Audi, I showed them, a Lego Audi Quattro, which doesn't look a lot like an Audi Quattro, if we're honest, but it's sort of recognizable, and die-cast one. And I said, look, if you want to, you give those toys to a kid for Christmas, and within a day or a week or a month, if you're lucky, they're going to get bored of them. And when they do, the only way to change the die-cast one is with an angle grinder and some super glue, right? That's, serious surgery. Whereas the Lego one, they can rip it to pieces and reassemble it into a dinosaur or a dragon or a unicorn. And that's the model in which we've got to build our businesses today.
Fantastic. Now, corresponding with this changed role of leadership in adaptability and foresight is what you call pushing power out to the edges. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Why is that important?
Yeah. So one of the things that almost every organization I've spoken to struggles with is making decisions. How do we take decisions quickly? And when you start to dig into the processes, into the people, into the structure of the organization, you find two things. First of all, information moves really slowly. So once a piece of information, a stimulus, if you like, reaches the organization from a customer or from a partner or from market intelligence, it often takes a very long time for that stimulus to reach a decision maker. And that's partly because the information moves really, really slowly. But it's partly because actually we've put all the power in our organizations right at the center. And we have these very large, very hierarchical organizations quite often where everybody just keeps deferring the decision to the next person up because they don't have the confidence, they've not been given the autonomy and the responsibility to take the decision to respond to that stimulus. And so you can do two things about this if you want to accelerate decision-making in the business. First of all, you can make the information move faster. You can invest in technology, you can invest in streamlining processes, in management consulting. And actually, these are often really good investments. I mean, the technology piece particularly. I think people often overestimate how much it costs to automate some functions, move information faster. It actually can be quite a relatively low investment. But a much, much better way to tackle it in some ways is to take all that power that we cling to at the center and push it out to the edge of the organization. And let people at the edge, once they see that stimulus, respond to it quickly because they can take that decision. It doesn't need to be pushed all the way up and all the way down the chain again. And actually, one of the examples I give in high frequency change of this is from Lidl, the German supermarket, which is growing at an incredible rate in Europe, an incredible rate in the UK particularly. And it's a particular favourite of ours because it's from my wife's hometown in Germany. So we always shop there if we can. We were delighted when it came to the UK and brought all of her childhood favourite delicacies with it. But a few years ago, it wasn't such a big name in the UK. It was sort of known for discount goods and weird brands and weird sort of German brands. And then all of a sudden they brought these One Direction Easter eggs onto the shelves in sort of Easter 2015. And they were very proud of this. It started getting people in the store, people started recognizing them as sort of serious competitor amongst some other branded goods, which was great until, and I'm apologizing now if this is triggering for anybody, until Zayn left One Direction just around that Easter. And this information came into the organization through social media. It came in through their social media manager who saw this news, had a little weep, and turned to the merchandising manager and said, look, we've got a problem. We've got these Easter eggs just rolled out and Zayn's just left One Direction. And she's very pragmatic about this. She says, well, look, 1/5 of the band's gone. We should knock 1/5 of the price off. And he says, great, I can do something with that. He crafts a beautiful tweet which captures the hearts of these weeping One Direction fans. And they all flood into the stores and pick up these Easter eggs. And now what's spectacular about this story is, first of all, that whole process from the news coming in from the social media manager to the merchandising manager taking the decision, and then that big commercial decision being pushed out to all the stores and across social media took 20 minutes. 20 minutes.
Wow.
Right. And that's because these people had been empowered with autonomy and responsibility. They've been given the skills and the training, and they've been given a box and told, look, within this box, you take decisions within this box, you are safe, right? We'll support you. We'll do anything. Straight outside that box, you're in trouble. But here's the box you can operate in. Here's the confidence to go and operate within that box. And the reason they needed to be given confidence because both those people were in their early 20s. They were young junior members of staff making that enormous decision. Now, I actually bumped into one of the non-executive directors of one of the much bigger supermarkets, one of the famous brands here in the UK a few years later, a brand anybody who's visited the UK will know. And I said to her, and she heard me tell this story in a presentation. And I said to her afterwards, I said, could you do this? And she said, 3 days. It would take us 3 days to take that decision because all the power is centralized and the information moves really slowly.
Wow. That's the best One Direction story I've ever heard, Tom.
It's really stuck in my mind. I only came across it because I judge an awards, one of the awards I judge. It was part of one of the entries for response to social media.
Very cool. Very cool. So that's a wonderful illustration. Is pushing power out to the edges then about enlarging that box?
No, it's about the box can be really small, but actually most people, it's kind of tiny Like most people are treated a lot like robots, particularly at the edge of the organization. They're given very little responsibility. They're given a script. They're given a standard set of processes to walk through. And we only really start to give people responsibility once they've demonstrated for a year or two that they can basically follow instructions. Do this, do that. And the person above them is quite often just doing exactly the same thing, but with instructions from their boss. And the person in front of them is quite often doing exactly the same thing with instructions from their boss. And you only see this when you start to examine processes. One of my favorite examples, and I can't remember if we talked about this last time, but I came across a massive engineering company, an American company, global, provides huge amounts of equipment to manufacturers around the world. Anybody who makes things on a process, whether it's breakfast cereal or oil, they provide loads of stuff for them. And back in sort of 1990s, they'd got burned by a customer going bust. And it cost them a few tens of thousands of pounds. But this is a pittance compared to their enormous turnover. But it had really upset them. And so the finance team had implemented very strict controls on the sign-off of customer credit, which meant that you were getting 3 layers of sign-off for any deal over about $10,000. And the result was this enormous backlog of administration. And this one junior person, this young woman in the finance team, was tasked with fixing this. And so she started looking around at software and technology, how can we move the information faster? She started looking at better processes and how other people did it. And eventually she came to the conclusion, which was just like, why don't we let the salespeople take more responsibility? This was one incident 20 years ago that cost us a relatively tiny amount of money, certainly compared to our turnover 20 years later. Do you know what? The risk-reward profile of this is all wrong. Let's give our salespeople a bit more training, a bit more support and documentation, but ultimately let's give them more responsibility and say, look, if you trust this customer, make the deal. And instead of your limit being $10,000, your limit's now $50,000, which still didn't cover the majority of their sales, which were big deals. But it meant for all those small orders, the salespeople could just take responsibility within those bounds, within the size of that box they'd been set, bigger than it was before. And suddenly their administrative load went right down. Their responsiveness to customers went right up because they could just say, yes, Mrs. Customer, yes, I will do that for you right now. And here's the deal, sign the contract, you can get the parts tomorrow. And it changed dramatic change to their business, which really just took trusting those people and just increasing the size of that box a bit.
That's fantastic. Let's talk about customer service representatives, if we could. Sales, great example, people on the front lines. But these days, we are talking to a lot of companies that are facing just a crush of demand for customer service and are having to support those customers with a workforce that's been rapidly shifted to work from home.
Absolutely. And these people are a great example of where you need to put in place all of those aspects around them that give them that responsibility. Because the perfect customer support call is the one that somebody only has to make once. The last thing you want to be doing is escalating. The last thing you want to be doing is having them call back. What you want to do is deal with it once, deal with it quickly. And in many ways, actually, you will leave the customer with a better impression of you than if they never had to make a support call at all. Actually, a problem solved is better than having no problem at all sometimes. And so what you need is these people who are going to take those calls, who are empowered. And it's what people often mistake this as a cheap response. They think that actually pushing this power out and devolving this responsibility is going to be cheaper than the software. Actually, it's not. Do you know what? Long run, it will be, but short term, it requires training. It requires actually some risk. You've got to accept some risk profile because mistakes will be made. It requires you putting in place probably better line management and good coaching for your line managers so that when the support comes up, they can spot people who are struggling, jump in, work out what people's needs are. It requires investment in your people. But if you can cut down the number of escalations, if you can cut down the number of times that people have to call back, your volumes can go down very, very dramatically. And you do that by putting power in the hands of these people in the contact centers who are taking these calls and offering the response that not necessarily the customer wants. You never want to be going, the number of people who call up, mobile phone service providers, for example, because they know that new customers get a better deal than they do and start, haggling. You can't just be giving them everything they want. But that ability, somebody empowered on the end of the line, and somebody who the customer recognizes is empowered, is going to have such a better result than somebody who's clearly just following a script, who's clearly just actually feeding information back into the machine, rather than actually taking responsibility and using their autonomy to solve the customer's problem.
Mm-hmm. So many organizations have been investing in coaching programs now for some time for their front lines. What kind of advice might you offer from the model articulated in this book to people who would design a coaching program for frontline customer service representatives?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest one is one of the lessons I learned really early is how deeply you need to listen to those people. So it's amazing how opaque most organizations are. So you go into an organization as a consultant, and you usually start at the top. You're usually speaking to people at sort of C-level or director level, and you get their impression for what the problems are, what the bottlenecks are, where things are going wrong. And then you go and speak to the middle management, and you get a completely different impression of what the challenges are, what the problems are, what the bottlenecks are. And then you go and speak to the people in the contact center, you speak to the people on the shop floor, you go and speak to people in the factory, and again, you get a completely different set. And what's really interesting is all of those people enjoy that process. They all enjoy the catharsis of release, of saying, this is what slows me down. This is what stops me being productive. This is what gets in my way. This is what pisses our customers off. They will all give you those answers. And so often, first of all, that process just doesn't happen often enough. The sort of the level of release I find when I go in and ask those questions, and people feel like they've not been asked those questions ever in a 14-year tenure with the business. It just comes tumbling out of them. But then translating what you hear into action, actually saying, okay, we understand that problem. We're going to fix that problem, not what the middle manager thought the problem was, not what the directors thought the problem was, but actually the problem you face. We're going to fix that problem. But if we do, and you acknowledge that we fixed that problem, then you're taking responsibility for improvement. You're taking you've raised that problem, it's the right thing to do. Here's our investment in fixing it. But now you're taking responsibility for taking that and moving us forward and, improving performance in one way or another. And I think, the coaching systems, it's really, really hard, particularly at scale, because what you're trying to do is create a replicable, repeatable process. But I think you've got to start it with that listening piece that pulls in at least the challenges that are recognized by a majority of people on the shop floor or the front lines of the contact center to drive that coaching process, rather than starting from the skills and behaviors that necessarily the leadership wants to see.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, that's inspiring and beautiful, and sounds just as useful as so many of the details offered throughout your book, Tom. I really appreciate your coming and keeping in touch, sharing this progress update on your work. And I'm really excited to get to read your book and let our community of people know about it. So again, congratulations. And thank you so much for joining us.
My absolute pleasure, Marshall. Really enjoyed it as ever.
Wonderful. Well, folks, thank you so much for joining us here for another episode of the Sprinklr Coffee Club. Please connect with Tom online. He is at Book of the Future on Twitter. He's really good at Twitter. Great guy to talk to there. And he's got a whole body of work that I think you will find powerful and inspiring. So thanks again, Tom. And thank you to everyone who joined us here for another Sprinklr Coffee Club. Take care.